What would genuinely happen if you introduced a Victorian child to the single greatest invention of the 21st century? Can of White Monster. Quick disclaimer, you shouldn't let your kids drink Monster energy drink. You shouldn't let them drink any kind of energy drink at all. Honestly, even us adults, even us men children, shouldn't be drinking energy drinks as well. But they're just so good. By the way, if you like and subscribe, I will make a follow-up video what would happen to a caveman if he drank a can of Red Bull. This little can is basically a miniature thermonuclear reactor which has all kinds of chemicals inside of it that just people from the Victorian era never tasted in their lives. The Victorian era lasted from 1837 to 1901, basically from Queen Victoria's ascension to the throne all the way until her death. Hey yo, she's kind of a baddie, yo. Now that era basically saw huge industrialization in the Great Britain and also its great expansion in conquering basically the entire world. But even with all the technological advancements and wealth, most of the population was still dirt poor. Now, yes, there was a small percentage of an upper class that was living rather healthy, but most people live in poverty, either in rural areas or in these industrial zones. And to make matters even worse, because of huge poverty, most children barely lived to the age of 5. But the good news is, if you live to see 5, the chances of you reaching age of 45 were drastically bigger. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's take our hypothetical Victorian child. Let's call him Dave. You just got back from your 14-hour work shift and you're walking across the street where you see this mysterious can. You manage to open it and drink it. What would happen to you, Dave? What would happen to you? Now, there is a mathematical formula to figure out just how much caffeine you can give to a child. 2.5 milligrams of caffeine per a kilogram of child's weight is the max you should give it. So let's say if a 10-year-old child on average weighs around 30 kilograms, so let's be honest, because of the Victorian malnourishment, it's probably close to like 25. You can get by with like 70 or 75 milligrams of caffeine if you gave it without, you know, exploding its heart. So how much caffeine is in a single can of White Monster energy drink? 160. More than double that a child can safely drink. Another disclaimer, don't feed your children energy drinks. It's not safe for them, even just don't. So what would that mean for poor Dave? Would his heart explode right there and then? Would his head enlarge and he would enter nirvana? Well, first and foremost, just like all of us addicts, he would first experience 4 hours of immeasurable joy and happiness, followed by 16 hours of unexplainable existential dread, with 2 hours in between to kind of recuperate. So good news, little Dave wouldn't die. There are a couple of interesting things that would happen to little Dave. First and foremost, he would be energized for some time. He would be very hyperactive, but really quickly, after like the sugar crash or caffeine crash, he would fall on the floor and just basically start convulsing and basically look like he was having a seizure attack. Now, that poor Victorian child has some kind of heart disease or heart problems that he obviously doesn't know about because he is living in poverty in 1857. He might actually get a heart attack, but if he didn't have any health problems, he would probably survive. He would feel like a crack addict for the next week, but hey, if after that week he didn't see a single other can of White Monster, he would probably be fine. And that's actually pretty similar to how, I guess, modern kids would also react to it. But there is a big difference, and that is the nourishment of Victorian children. Because you gotta keep in mind, they were basically eating just some basic porridges, a piece of bread, and then maybe bacon once a week if they were lucky. Couple that with them living in these industrial areas that are full of like this polluted air that they are breathing in, and their bodies are already kind of worn down and their immune system is already kind of, you know, struggling, and their bowel system, and you know, basically imagine if you had like a clogged up sewage system and you basically put nuclear waste down it, kind of like in New York. Yeah, basically what I'm trying to say, their bowels would be destroyed. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a 24-year-old man child, and when I drink a single can of White Monster, I am on the toilet in the next 30 minutes. Now imagine that poor malnourished child having explosive diarrhea. If the heart problems wouldn't kill it, unfortunately that would finish its job. Because you might stop laughing, you might be laughing, but diarrhea is a serious problem. If you're malnourished, you're losing vital nutrients from your body and water as well. To replenish that water, you have to drink dirty water in the industrial zones that are polluted and give you even more diarrhea. So yeah, the chances are that a Victorian child drinking a White Monster wouldn't have any lethal consequences, but honestly the consequences to health in general would be so devastating that that child would probably want to be not living anymore for at least a week until it gets out of his system. Okay, I say a week, but it's probably like a few days. You get what I mean. But what would happen if he found another can immediately after? Well, then his head would probably explode, not gonna lie. I mean, if you ever gave a kid energy drink, well, first and foremost, it's extremely funny, but yeah, it does have genuine consequences on it. But the thing is, like, kids these days take up all of these chemicals inside of them since birth. They're like exposed to stuff like Coca-Cola and fizzy drinks like in an early age, so their bodies do get to adapt to these small toxins. So by the time that they're like 13 and start chugging energy drinks down like there's no tomorrow, they're already used to it. But a poor Victorian child that is doing like 12 to 14 to 16 hours of work every single day and coming back for a single loaf of bread, getting this energy drink, you know, to drink it. What the f did I just say? Yeah, it would be absolutely devastating to its health. But on a more positive note, how would this impact their line of work? Most kids in the Victorian era were actually working jobs. They were working upwards to 14 hours a day. Like 12-hour shifts were a minimum. And they worked all kinds of jobs. If they were in rural areas, they were doing like field work, tending to the cows. But if they were in industrial zones, they were working in mines, factories. If they were working on the streets, they were selling newspapers, cleaning up, whatever. And here we are in our economy. You can't even get a job after a 5-year degree. So if you give a child a can of White Monster energy, I guarantee you he would be very productive for a few hours. Now, if little Dave was working in coal mines, he would probably get an existential dread because he would be so hyperactive enclosed in this dark and damp space. But imagine a child working as a newspaper salesman, getting his hands on a Monster energy drink. That bro would be selling that newspaper like a crack addict. I don't know if you ever interacted with a crack addict, but they are very strong sellers. You know what? You probably don't believe it, so I'm gonna ask my friend. Hello there. Okay, Penguin, what do you think? Is feeding a Victorian child Monster energy drink bad? Fuck you know. Okay, but here I'm left wondering, what did they feed these queens that they were reigning and living for like 100 years? Obviously not cans of White Monster.